Do you frequently feel like you need encouragement from others? Do you sometimes feel excluded or on the outside looking in? Welcome to the Transformational Peace Podcast, and I'm Dr. Lee. In this episode, we will talk about self-validation and self-acceptance and how it affects our lives. And thank you for clicking on this video, and if it provides you with encouragement, please click the subscribe or follow button below. Also, please share this video with someone you feel might find this information helpful. Hello friends, thanks for joining me, and today we'll be discussing Empower Yourself, the path to self-validation and acceptance. Self-validation is a crucial component of our emotional well-being and self-esteem. It involves recognizing, accepting, and appreciating our own feelings, thoughts, and experiences without seeking approval or validation from others. When we learn to validate ourselves, we cultivate a sense of inner worth and learn to trust our own judgments and emotions. This practice empowers us to rely less on external validation and fosters a deeper sense of self-awareness and confidence. Additionally, self-acceptance is a journey that involves recognizing and embracing all aspects of ourselves, both the positive and negative. It means acknowledging our strengths, weaknesses, thoughts, and emotions without judgment or criticism. True self-acceptance allows us to cultivate a sense of inner peace. Furthermore, we have to validate ourselves before we can accept ourselves. So first, before we talk about self-validation and acceptance, we need to talk about the cycle of invalidation. And second, I'll be discussing self-validation and self-acceptance, their importance and how they interact with each other. And third, I'm going to make some recommendations at the end of the video to help us move from invalidation to validation and acceptance of ourselves. So first, we'll talk about how we invalidate ourselves emotionally. And basically, this cycle of invalidation is how we learn to not accept our own feelings. So in stage one, an emotion is triggered by a thought or an external event or stimulus. And in stage two, our feelings aren't validated because we're told our feelings are somehow inappropriate, and so we are either ignored or punished. And in stage three, we then tell ourselves our feelings aren't valid and we shouldn't think or feel that way. And stage four teaches us to suppress or detach from our feelings so we don't have to feel them, and when we do experience our emotions, we feel guilty or shameful for feeling and that we perceive ourselves as weak. And finally, in stage five, we just go back to stage one and we start the process all over again. So the cycle I just described is more or less the adult version of an insecure attachment style that children experience. And not to worry, I'm going to go more in depth on the cycle of secure and insecure attachment styles of infancy in future videos. So now we're going to discuss self-validation and self-acceptance. First and foremost, when we self-validate, we get to know ourselves fully and treat ourselves as a good friend would treat us. We maximize our independence. Seeking external validation in this process of getting to know ourselves fully literally diminishes our trust and belief in ourselves. We need to develop our own self-worth and take time to create a supportive and validating place for ourselves to create safety and security. It's like that old adage, you have to love yourself before you can love anyone else, or you have to be a good friend to yourself before you can be a friend to someone else. In learning to validate ourselves, internal validation, our self-awareness increases, which allows us to better manage our thoughts and feelings. So now I'm going to give you a few examples of the different types of external validation we may experience. And the first is academic validation. Now, I can already hear some of you saying, isn't education and achievement a good thing? And my answer would be, of course, education and achievement are admirable. The problem lies in when we place the validation of our identity and self-esteem with the approval of others or external factors like grades. In other words, once our grades are final and graduation occurs, we need to transition to the next stage in life. I'm reminded of a YouTube video I'd seen recently of a young man who appeared to be at or near his college graduation. He was talking mostly about what he was going to do next with his life. I assumed he had done reasonably well because he was considering what his future might look like. And what he said next was quite surprising. He actually stated, "I have done everything that other people have told me to do my entire life." And what he said afterwards was even more revealing. He stated, "I don't know what to do next." Amazing. He then went on to say, "I can't even decide what I want to have for lunch." Clearly, he was feeling quite a bit of anxiety, and we do this when we don't feel safe. Now, as his comments continued, it was more of the same where he described his insecurities regarding his future. Clearly, this is an example of externally validating ourselves through academics. He was simply unable to internally validate himself and make a decision. And the important point here is that an internal perspective of validation speaks to our autonomy and individuation, which facilitates our transition to the next stage of life, whatever it may be. Being confident in ourselves during this transitional phase in life can be helpful in identifying future opportunities. And next, I'm going to discuss familial or family validation. Now again, let me state from the onset that family is important. We receive a lot of our security and identity from our family, especially during our early years. However, I often see unhealthy enmeshment in families which directly affects our self-worth. Often, we will allow other family members to overstep our boundaries simply because we want them to accept and love us. Or other times, we may violate self-boundaries by going to extremes to make our family proud of us, which may often be to our emotional or physical detriment. I think we can clearly see that we're seeking external validation here. And the last is social validation, or better yet, social media validation. Now, we all need a little reassurance from time to time, and frequently checking in with a friend to maybe ask them what they think of our new shirt we've just purchased is pretty normal. Social media validation, however, becomes a problem when it is more frequent and we become more dependent on it. A great example of this would be when we're feeling lonely, and as opposed to maybe going out and hanging out with a few good friends, we choose to post on Twitter and overshare about our lonely feelings. In other words, we're being dependent on others to validate how or what we should be feeling. Additionally, what you may have noticed about these three examples I've just given is that in each instance, we've struggled with our personal boundaries. When we set our boundaries with others, those who understand our boundaries and get us aren't going to be disappointed with us and are actually going to respect us. In other words, self-boundaries help protect us in terms of our time and ability to create a secure space for self-reflection. The key here is when we learn to spend as much time with ourselves as we do with others, we begin to learn how to move from external validation to our own internal validation. And here's one of the really important keys of internal or self-validation. We learn that we have imperfections and weaknesses, and that's okay. So what we feel and think about ourselves is not only okay, but reinforces our belief in ourselves. And on that note, let's talk a bit about acceptance or self-acceptance. And first and foremost with self-acceptance, and this is crucial, we need to focus on improving ourselves even when it's a small or incremental improvement. Even more importantly, it doesn't matter where we are in life, we need to start where we are. We need to invest our time and energy in ourselves even if we receive disapproval from others, especially our friends. Remember, when someone is in front of us and maybe they're criticizing us, it's only for the moment. In other words, we often imagine or wonder what that friend who isn't around might be thinking about us. Trust me, they're not thinking about us. In reality, they're literally thinking about their own life problems or difficulties they're dealing with. Everyone has their own self-image, self-worth, and self-acceptance, and that's what they're trying to do, whether it's working or not. Our job is to do everything in our power to build up our own self-worth and consequently self-acceptance. Now, I know some of you out there are thinking, well, life's not just all about me, and I agree with you 200%. Great relationships and knowing how to relate to others is the most important thing we can do in life. However, that's not what we're talking about here. Remember, we have to accept and care for ourselves before we can do the same for others. We need to be the best accepted, authentic, grounded selves we can be. When we consistently practice showing up as our true selves or accepted selves every day, we break the habit of performing for others and seeking acceptance from others. Remember, in the past video on insecurity where I said we are our own worst critics, we are truly the only one who knows ourselves better than our friends, siblings, or even parents. Our own journey and our own mindset from how we grew up as children to how we are as adults is based on our experience, not others' experience of us. Therefore, we are the only ones who truly knows our inner thoughts and experiences best. So why wouldn't we be the best person to accept ourselves? And as I famously said before, we need to accept ourselves, good or bad, along with our imperfections. Sometimes we may have negative feelings and be hurt. However, our pain is valid and we should be accepting of who we are, especially at that moment, not invalid simply because we see ourselves as damaged or unacceptable. Furthermore, at times, we all struggle due to perceived deficiencies or unacceptable parts of ourselves from past experiences. However, until we accept these perceived or unacceptable parts of ourselves, we will still feel somehow less than. And unfortunately, we often feel somewhat incomplete by living a life of regret and never reaching our full or true potential. So now I'm going to leave a few helpful recommendations for dealing with self-validation and self-acceptance. Number 1, identify where our validation and acceptance are coming from. If our validation and self-worth is largely external, we will lose our connection with our authentic selves, which is essentially a difficulty in accepting and trusting ourselves. And as I've said earlier in this video, we should spend at least as much time with ourselves as we do with others. And this time should be a time of solitude and reflection, not isolation. We need this time alone to learn to validate and accept ourselves so that we can build a safe and supportive space to learn how to trust ourselves. And number 2, remember that we are always a work in process. There are many things we haven't learned or experienced yet because we are all in this process called life. We need to constantly be telling ourselves that we can discover new parts of our personalities, especially the way we think and feel. We need to decide what areas of our lives we want to grow and work on. And if we go in a certain direction in pursuit of this growth and it isn't working out, change your direction. Making ourselves a priority is important such that we set goals to achieve and become a better version of ourselves. We are all in this process of changing, and we need to acknowledge and make choices regarding this change. And number 3, understand that none of us are perfect and will never be perfect. Remember, our imperfections make us who we are. And again, as we discussed earlier regarding acceptance, embrace the unacceptable or unattractive parts of who we are. By allowing ourselves to accept and embrace our imperfections, we can allow ourselves to decide if and how we want to change them. In other words, we get to decide what is acceptable and how we are going to validate ourselves, imperfections and all. Well, again, that's it for this video, and I hope you received some great ideas on how we can all improve ourselves. And remember, speak in such a way that others will listen to you, and listen in such a way that others will speak to you. The quality of our relationships we have with ourselves and ultimately others will determine the quality of our life. Grace and peace unto you. I'm Dr. Lee.